Welcome to Coffee with Trucentive, 30 minutes of incentive automation tips, tricks, and best practices. My name is Jim Meyer, and today we're going to be talking about using incentives to schedule more meetings. Before we do get started, we respect your time. We'll keep this to under 30 minutes as always. We like to keep our coffees educational and current, so if you do have a suggestion for a future Coffee with Trucentive, please feel free to send it to terrymiller@trucentive.com. We'll also get to as many questions as possible. If we don't have time, we'll be sure to follow up via email, and we will follow up with a recording of this coffee on Monday. For our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about why incentives should not be the main reason you get a customer to act. And while that sounds contrary, we'll go into that. Why incentives work, how you can use incentives to drive up the overall perceived value of your offer, and then we'll go into a little bit more on the details of perceived value, testing, and finally wrap it up with a little bit about sending incentives to maximize the value of your brand. So incentives should not be the main reason for action. Prospects should always have an existing need or interest, and the incentive value should not be so high that they take action when they don't have a need or interest. They should also be a decision maker or influencer with the direction you're trying to go with your marketing effort to get that meeting. And we have to remember that the movement of somebody using an incentive is usually about timing. If your target audience is on target and you're reaching out to the right people, they do have a need, or they do want more information, or they do want to meet with you. However, we all have very busy schedules, and the incentive is just that tipping point that allows them to make the decision to meet with you now versus later. When you're considering the value of your incentive, you want to also consider the future costs of meetings and engagement with that individual. Because when they're looking at it, they're looking at engaging with you, not just today, but over the whole process to learn more about your product or service. So you really need to consider the whole package when you're building out that incentive program. You also need to consider that incentives can negatively impact the success of your program. Just recently, a leading provider of cloud services offered a notebook to each meeting participant, and they send out invitations, and after 18 months, the close rate was less than 1%. And when they looked at their overall model, the typical close rate on a qualified lead was 17%. Well, they had a mismatch. They had a too high of a value incentive for this target audience. And what happened was people signed up, they took the meeting, they took the notebook, and they walked away, and it wasn't the right people at the right time. So they didn't have that existing need or interest. Now, the example of the notebook was a good example of why incentives do work or how they should work, and they're just misapplied. The object of that incentive is to tip the balance in the favor to get that individual to take that action now. So they have their opportunity cost of what else they could be doing, the level of interest they have, and the value of the interest. This is often an emotional decision. Once again, it's about time. Do I have time for this meeting? It's not really about the overall cost. Incentives that are tied to the circumstances of a particular meeting also have a much higher perceived value. So if you have a lunch meeting and you want to tie it to DoorDash, Grubhub, or Uber Eats, it has a higher perceived value because you're wrapping that incentive in with the overall process and the discussion you're going to have with that individual, with the goal of improving that ask so you've got that added value to balance it so that the individual's ready to make that decision to meet with you at that time. The goal with a meeting incentive is to drive up that total perceived value beyond what it costs you to provide that particular incentive. So the perceived value differential really comes down to what is the perceived value of the offer minus what it costs you. So by combining the value of the meeting, the value of what you're going to talk about, the information you're going to provide to that individual with that incentive to get him to do it now gives you the opportunity to have a higher perceived value. Now, you can use other things that are going on in the industry, the company, or any other type of event which we call multipliers. So there could be a major turning point for a company. They went public, they just took financing, they could have just had a crisis, or we could have something like COVID hitting where there's changes in the dynamic of the environment, or it could just be about unexpected delight, doing something really cool that gets them excited to say, hey, I want to do this today. When asking for a meeting, perception of that meeting is everything. And so trying to determine the best balance between the market-driven elements, i.e. the factors that are technically about this meeting, and the marketer-driven elements, the enhancements or improving the ask of this particular meeting, have to come into balance so that we have a good package that will deliver that prospect or customer to that meeting. Market-driven elements can be everything from a subject matter that's really hot in industry. Maybe there's been a recent virus or something associated with technology that's really hot. Or it could be that the individual that you're requesting to attend that meeting is going to meet with a pundit. Maybe your VP of engineering is a well-known speaker, very well respected, and it's just great to talk to such a dynamic, smart person. Those are market-driven elements. If the case is where we do not have a really strong market-driven elements or elements in this ask, we want to combine it with marketer-driven elements to improve that presentation, and that's where incentives come in. And crafting this ideal balance really does come down to marketing intuition, what has happened in past programs, what really works the best, and crafting that perceived value differential so that we have the most economical and valuable ask or incentive ask combination to drive those people to the meeting, and hopefully that gives us a good return on our incentive value. When we look at actually delivering the ask, we have to look at the overall market-driven and marketer-driven aspects of that presentation. So if we look at marketer-driven, we can look at companies like Amazon. They're all about high-speed delivery. They pioneered that. That's the message. Apple, Steve Jobs drove the trend towards high-value packaging. While an iPhone or any Apple product is not the least expensive product in the market, adding really well-done packaging to it adds to that perceived value. For Four Seasons Resorts, it's all about their lobbies and pools. The hotel rooms may not be the greatest, but the initial influence of the lobby and pools is fantastic. And so that's how they've created their marketer-driven presentation of the products they offer. Market-driven really comes down to value. And this is where we include incentives, bundles, and discounts combined with the marketer-driven aspects of the equation to create that overall perceived value and influence that individual to take the next step. So along the lines of meetings, it's exactly the same. We want to craft that ideal ask that balances that marketer-driven capability with the overall value. When we put together our ask, we have to think about what might have the higher perceived value with regard to the incentive that we offer. We just did a program with a leading analytics provider, and they were targeting mid-level software managers. It was purely educational. It did require some in-webinar feedback, so there was a little bit of work to be done in the webinar itself. So over a period of 6 months, a little over 6 months, they ran a variety of different offers and tested their hypothesis with regard to what the ultimate incentive should be for these programs. So they ran a series of webinars with case one, which was a quantity of 50 $50 gift cards for all of those who completed the webinar. The other strategy, number two, was to lessen the overall number of gift cards but increase the value. As we can see, the overall value or the overall cost to the company was the same with both strategies. However, after they ran this for about 6 months, Webinar 2 had a much higher response rate. And so with that, they found that, hey, offering greater value cards, but fewer of them, was a better model for their overall gift card strategy or their incentive strategy to get these individuals to attend these webinars. So it could be surprising because personally, I would think just through intuition, $50 cards having a better chance of attending or a better chance of winning would be the more likely case. In this case, it was not. The conversion results were that the incentive number 2 had about a 37% increase in conversions over incentive strategy number 1. Once again, the actual value is the same, but the perceived value was higher. So this is why I suggest that everybody test their strategies. And we do this here. On this webinar, we had 2 sample sets. Sample A will send you a Starbucks gift card. Sample B, no incentive offered. Sample A had a 12% greater conversion rate just because we offered a thank you gift card. Anyone who's on this webinar now, of course, you get a gift card as well, but it really does show the value of adding a slight incentive to any ask to get that balance and get that perceived value up enough where you get the take rate on those meetings. If you're interested in digging a little deeper into conversion analysis and really trying to figure out what the elements of your overall program are and what's going to add the value and getting that balance to determine the best incentive for your meeting ask, you can use this conversion index. And I'm not going to go into detail on this, but if you want more information, you can go to McLabs, which is the parent of Marketing Sherpa, and you can get a lot of information on using this conversion index to build out your strategy and determine what the optimal mix is for you with your program. And of course, the goal here is showing high perceived value at a minimal cost so that your return on investment or return on incentive is high. Choosing your incentive timing for a meeting, you have lots of options. You can, one, send an incentive before you actually have that meeting, but after they've agreed to the meeting. And you might think, well, why would I send them an incentive if they haven't actually shown up for the meeting? It sets the tone for that meeting. It shows that I trust you. I've sent you this incentive for coming. And typically what we see is less than 3% of individuals redeem their incentive if they don't make the meeting. So it's not a huge concern with regard to dollars. The one thing you can do is you can set an expiration date on that incentive that is close to the meeting date so that if they don't show, that incentive will no longer be valid and you can recapture your unused incentives. Another option is using gated incentives. Now, these are sent out before the event to get people to sign up. You're sending them an actual incentive. It could be an Amazon card, it could be a meal, it could be whatever you choose, but it's gated by a password. And when that individual comes to the meeting, they get the code to use that card. And because you have complete control, you put that incentive out there and it adds that extra level of enticement. The perceived value is up, especially if they have that incentive in hand. If you do have an invitation, the only downside of this is that you potentially are going to put out dollars on the front end and have them sitting out there for individuals who may not ever come to have a meeting and you're tying those dollars up. But usually that's not a huge issue with regard to the gated incentives. The other option is during the event. It's minor logistical issue because you have to go in and pop in their email and send it to them, but it's very common. The most common, however, is after your event. And this is the one that I prefer just because you can entice somebody with emails, get them to sign up and come to your meeting, and then after the meeting, you can follow up with a thank you email and or text, and have additional calls to action. Maybe that's scheduling the next meeting. Maybe you have a Calendly link or some other vehicle to move the sales process forward. When they redeem that incentive, if you hit them with that request at that time, they're typically in a good mood because you just gave them something nice for attending the first meeting, and they want to continue that relationship. So once again, it's a great way to extend that conversation. Here's a great example of increasing perceived value, and in this case, it's Alvino. Alvino took their face lotion and essentially rebranded it, different name and description. So it went from lotion to Positively Radiant Daily Moisturizer. They modified the packaging, not at any additional cost, just a different style. And then they put it in proximity to authority. And in this case, it's Jennifer Aniston, with the connotation that Jennifer Aniston's beautiful. She uses Alvino Positively Radiant Daily Moisturizer, and if you use it, you will look radiant and beautiful as well. So in this case, they did a really nice job, and it dramatically impacted sales. Now, while in this case, they did not use availability, limited number, because that's really not a goal when you're selling product, it is a common tool when you're looking at meetings. So in the incentive process, the concept of gated deliveries and timing for redemption so that those individuals have to attend that meeting to claim their incentive in that time period can be a very valuable tool. So the one element Alvino didn't use here is one of the most popular elements when you're scheduling future meetings. Real world testing is the only way to optimize your strategy. The human element, when you add that to the equation, just makes it so difficult to come to a conclusion and really pinpoint what will work and what won't work at any one given time. It's just really just too hard to do. In fact, they say there are experienced marketers and expert testers, but there are no expert marketers. And in general, if you ask your marketing team or a customer, they're terrible at predicting their own behavior. So it really does come down to testing is the only way that you can come up with a concrete, statistically valid analysis of the program that you're running. And here's a really good example. There was a free trial sign up for a popular antivirus software suite, and there were 3 options that were tested over a 90-day period. And those options were give them a 20% discount at sign up, then one day after sign up, render a pop-up banner offering a 30% discount, and then 3 days later, try a pop-up banner offering 10% discount. Now, these were all mutually exclusive, so they weren't compounding on top of each other. And which one would you predict would win? The answer was C. This was much more effective and it was more cost effective. So the cheapest offer at the right time worked better. Now, I wouldn't have predicted this, and very likely you probably didn't pick this one either. However, once again, using testing is the key to successful programs that you can trust and rely on that testing for future programs. Finally, just want to close talking a little bit about brand. When you send incentives, it's all about you, it's about your brand and the incentive. So as you think about incentivizing someone for a meeting and getting them there, don't just consider the value of that incentive. Giving that incentive is just a piece of the equation. A big part of it is delivering it, saying thank you for that meeting. In addition to that, the actual incentive redemption process is really important. So as you send that initial message out, and then you follow it up with a series of reminders, you're continually putting your brand and your message in front of that individual. So you have that opportunity to continue to reinforce that you've done something nice for them, you're following through, you're trustworthy because you've given them that incentive. In addition, on that redemption process, not only do you want to make it easy, but it's a great opportunity to have additional calls to action. So as they redeem that incentive, you can ask for another meeting or you could ask for feedback. So don't think of your overall incentive process as the incentive alone. Don't make that process a one and done. Make sure that you include those reminders so that everyone claims their incentive and you get that sales process or marketing process moving forward throughout the whole incentive cycle. That's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. We do have time for questions, and it looks like we do have quite a few. We'll get started and we'll answer as many questions as we can in the time remaining. The first question we have is, what is the minimum incentive value that we find effective for a meeting? And it really does very much depend on the meeting, but I will give you some rough numbers. If you're going to offer coffee for an event, maybe spending a half hour with somebody and a cup of coffee, typically you want to go at least $15 for that cup of coffee. That way they can get a Starbucks card or a Peet's card or Dunkin' Donuts or whatever you prefer, and you can let them select their coffee vendor of their choice, but they also get the ability to have enough value that they don't have to add funds of their own to get what they want. If they have to do that, it really does hurt the value of that particular incentive. If you're going for a longer technical meeting, highly recommend you tie this in not only with a higher value, but with a overall incentive design that ties that dollar range in with what you're offering. So for example, schedule it as a lunch meeting and have it at lunch and offer DoorDash, Grubhub, or Uber Eats. And then you've tied it all together with lunch. And typically we recommend around $30 to $35 depending on the type of person you're meeting with and the amount of time. You can go a lot higher if you want to do something really exciting. And you might also want to offer some of the ideas for what they might want to choose for lunch using those services. Once again, the reason you want to offer the 3 different cards when it's delivery lunch, DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Grubhub, is because they may already have one of those applications on their phone. You don't want to force them to go out and sign up for Grubhub, for example, if they have DoorDash or vice versa, because they're going to have to put their credit card in, they're going to have another app on their phone, their information's out in the world at one more location, and they may just not feel that that's something they want to do to take that meeting. If they already have DoorDash on their or Uber Eats on their phone, they can click the link, they can claim the card, and they can choose their lunch. So it makes it really easy for them. The next question is, we use a service to deliver incentives that delivers them for free, but they do not allow reminders. Which is more effective? Well, I can tell you definitely sending reminders is more effective. The one and done approach does not work that well. Having a reminder after that, you'll pick up about 50% more respondents to your incentive. Secondly, you're also paying a lot more money. The services that deliver your incentive for free typically keep the incentives that are not claimed. And in many cases, this can be in excess of 20% of the incentives. That's the national US average. So in the end, you're paying about 20% of the incentive values to deliver your incentives for free. Plus, you don't get the marketing opportunity to send those reminders, put your brand in front of them over and over. So you're paying more and you're getting less brand impressions throughout that process. So which one works better? Clearly, I believe that if you're going to be using these in the B2B environment, you're really going to want to consider using an incentive platform that will allow you to deliver those reminders. Well, it looks like that's all the time we have. As promised, we want to keep you to 30 minutes or less. Thank you for joining us, and please look for our next Coffee with Trucentive, which you should be getting an email in the next 2 weeks or so. Thanks so much. Have a great day.